So we talked about the default sort of capitalist questions being sort of like, what do you do? Like the underlying sort of tone being, how much do you earn? How much capital do you have? Where do I rank you in this sort of like capitalist hierarchy that's like built into my brain? I hate that question. Again, all of this is in many ways building upon this heritage that the Bhutanese have, which is a deep respect for nature, as well as a deep Buddhist culture that holds these values of loving kindness to all sentient beings, non-violent. Message of embodiment speaks to ways in which I think our Web3 community has maybe not taken the sort of latent space of what it means to fully know something, to its ultimate potential.
Hey guys, what you're about to watch is one of the many interviews I took during my time in Thailand for DevCon 2024. I was in the country for a total of over a month and got the opportunity to meet a bunch of really cool people and interview them in person. DevCon itself was an incredible and interesting experience, and you can find my full review of it on my Patreon. So if you like the content I've been making and would like me to continue going to these kinds of events and improving, then I hope you'll become a patron starting at just $3 per month for access to loads of bonus content and Blockchain Socialist merch at patreon.com/theblockchainsocialist. Hi everyone, you're listening again to another one of the short interviews that I'm doing while in Thailand for DevCon. I'm here at Funding the Commons during the Design Jam part of all the days that they're organizing, and I'm here with Tony Lai. We were just talking about, before I started recording, about many different things, and one in particular to kind of hone in on is this idea of how to, I guess, embody our politics is maybe one way to say it. But actually, quick introduction, you are the other half of Mothertree Labs?
Indeed. I mean, we're a collective currently of two, but we're constantly bringing in new friends and family as part of our work. But Mothertree Labs is a non-profit initiative started by Susanne Aichele and myself. Susanne brings the narrative engineering side of things, and I bring the legal engineering side of things. And so it's, we say it's the law and the lore, and those sound the same in my accent.
The thing is, if you're Australian, you can say the lore and the lore.
Well, English, Australia, anyway. I mean, we all get into the overlaps as well as the differences in these two, I guess, systems of knowing. And one thing that both of us are incredibly interested in is the movement beyond just being in our heads and moving into our bodies, and ultimately the idea of spirit, the idea of emotions and psychology, this aspect of like consciousness shifting that might be maybe lacking or minimized within the current sort of late stage capitalist dynamic. To the extent there is something that we might worship, we could say it is capital itself within that dynamic. And so the interesting prompts that you gave me was the current context that we're in.
Yeah, so like the way that I like to, we're like the day after, more, it's hard with Asian time, Trump was elected again, and at least, for some people, like at least for me, this was something that I am not nearly as surprised about. I think for a lot of people, it was not like a surprise. It's more felt like, it felt much worse actually than a surprise. It's felt, the only way I can describe it is like we're all strapped to a chair and we're on a conveyor belt, seeing at the end of what's coming, and we can't really move. The other day I was talking with a friend of mine, the co-founder of BreadChain goes by Cassandra.eth. It's because he, likes the myth of Cassandra, in which she is like unable to like change basically the future that she knows that she's coming. All she can do is like kind of scream at people and like yell at them, like why are you doing nothing? And I think a lot of people feel this way, and they feel kind of like quite nihilistic. I mean, it's like very hard right now to see, at this moment in time at least, like too much hope. At the same time, in the crypto space, of course, there were a lot of people who were supporting Trump, who were behind him because he's going to save our tokens. I know I sent out a video essay right before about how the left does not hate crypto as a way to kind of just like help, because part of the narrative, a part of that is that like the left, Kamala Harris is somehow considered the left in a lot of these people's brains, is like, going to destroy everything that they stand for and then destroy democracy and whatever else. Each half of like the sides are just like unable to seem to like there doesn't seem to be any pathway or bridge to like dissolving all of this conflict in not in a like hippie liberal way, but like in a like necessary practical, like we live together in a society, we need to like come together and make things better. So like I guess I was curious how do we kind of not only like stay out of the realm of like just thinking about how horrible it is, but then like embodying, putting into practice like the things that are actually necessary for the mind as well to move past this.
I mean, that's a really
big question.
Big question. I want to
maybe just like how do you do it, or like how would you suggest it? I mean,
I want to reference this particular community that we're in without going too far beyond to sort of like the general population of the US or the rest of the world. I mean, because the US election impacts the rest of the world in a big way, and there's a lot of people around the world who have had their eyes on it. But our community in particular, this Web3 community, is in some ways very much premised upon this idea of empowerment, this idea of participation, this idea that any idea that is put out there is only as good as how it's put into practice, and because it's an open source ecosystem, how it's put into practice can be taken from one place and reapplied pretty much at zero cost, except for the cost of actually doing that local contextualization. That principle is a principle of getting out of the conveyor belt. It's the idea that we have the tools to actually start building our own vehicles and like not following this train off the cliff, but actually stepping aside, building some other vectors of movement. And I think that the message of embodiment speaks to ways in which I think our Web3 community has maybe not taken the sort of latent space of what it means to fully know something, to its ultimate potential. So, what does it look like? We talked about embodied politics, but there's a range of things that play out in this area. We've got sort of politics, policy, and the ways in which laws are made and what laws should be made, and then governance in terms of like how those laws are sort of played out. You've got like enforcement systems, you've got like various different ways that you want to be able to enable a system of transparency around who's doing what, so that you can sort of have some common, stable coordination framework. What does it mean to embody that? Because I think what we've had a lot of focus on in our crypto and Web3 world is the informational side of things. You've got the ways in which we measure certain things, like the level of with Breadchain, you've got
the market cap of tokens.
Exactly, the market cap of tokens, the number of users you have, the number of devs, devs, and all of these things are informational pieces. But like what we get in a space like this with Funding the Commons is that in-person embodied sort of activation, and the idea that we might start to embody our governance through these mechanisms of like in-person attunement, making decisions that are a part of the realities of a particular locality, or the realities of a particular place and a space. I think the beautiful thing that I've seen coming out of Funding the Commons being in all of these different locations is that we do get a different cross-section of local participants who are coming because they see the potential in this wider ideology of the commons, this wider ideology of socialism, sort of, but beyond socialism, it's sort of like this treating the other as in some way part of yourself, like that. There's some underlying sort of spiritual dynamic that is common in many, many different traditions of religion, but that is being embodied here within Web3 as part of a series of technical and sort of convening-based functions. And what I'm hearing you sort of, and part of what our previous conversation was about, is that there is this in a sense, almost missing piece that we can sort of like reanimate in terms of not just narrative, but the ways in which we step into Web3 as a belief system that is about these fundamental dynamics of building a commons, nurturing a future that is participatory, that allows us to not feel like we're on a conveyor belt. And I think that's part of the system of institutions that we've seen like get increasingly more and more powerful and more centralized over the last century or more, that is creaking now. Yeah. Right? And we're seeing in these elections, and one way to embody the realities of the election as it happened is just to know that there has been a sort of series of disruptions that are continuing to happen, and like the ways that we can find our communities, certainly within the Web3 space, is to gather, to reconvene, to be with each other, and to work on these elements of care that are real in the physical world. And that care can involve in-person care, food systems, shelter, mutual aid groups, the sorts of things that actually have happened in various different places around the world when there are disasters. And while this may not be like a natural disaster, some people might consider it a political disaster. Again, coming together in those like physical embodied mutual aid dynamics, just like we're gathering here, is, I feel like, part of that journey towards embodied knowing of these potential new systems as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that there is like, I have plenty of critiques about like Web3 generally as a like kind of concept, or like marketing, more so as like a VC marketing narrative. But then there is something, I mean, one of the things I was thinking about last night was like, it kind of actually, for me, solidified like we should probably stay in this space, because right now the institutions are failing us. And it's kind of like, I don't know, at a certain point there's something, of course, terrifying and freeing about just like, in some ways, like, our heroes are dead, they're not coming to save us. So like, you now have the mantle to like, and you are smart enough to like go and like take part and like build it yourself. And
maybe to build off of something you were talking about with Susanne in terms of like moving beyond this idea of the hero's journey, I think that idea that you need to be the hero, or that the hero is not going to come and save you. Again, maybe that's not a bad thing, because it helps people get over that hero's journey, and you start thinking more about like, what's the container? Like because this idea of the carrier bag theory of fiction that Ursula Le Guin points out is like, it's not about the person who goes out and like slays the mammoth. I mean, it makes a great story, but it's about the hearth, the home, the carrier bag of oats that kind of, and those are harder stories to tell, but they're also much more communal stories to tell. They're more embodied stories of like the practice of being together, of making a home together, of caring for each other. These are the, some may call them mundane, but actually they do form the fabric of the kinds of embodied belonging and embodied care chains. And the care chains speak to this idea that if we care for those around us, we don't need to necessarily care for every single like thing that's grabbing our attention on the sort of like global stage. There are people immediately around us that have relationships with us already that are caring for others, and if we care for them, that thing will continue. And again, that element of regrounding in the care, in the local, I think is maybe part of this unfurling that's happening with institutions doing their thing, and this space in particular offering potentially even more hope now for many folks. And I mean, this was in some sense part of the allure of Bhutan, which is where we were just before we came to Thailand. Bhutan offers this narrative, but also a spiritual, cultural tradition that has been guarded and protected, and is now held within the context of a fairly small kingdom, but which is offering this sort of like Switzerland of Asia with a sort of like strong spiritual, mindful grounding possibility, deeply woven with Web3, right? That's the other thing, right? The king and the prime minister and their whole sort of leadership has sort of taken a deep dive into digital currencies and Web3, because they are the first nature positive country. They've got this little group of net zero and nature positive countries, and they're trying to craft this post-capitalist imagination, right? And that, in the context of what just happened last night, I think is just going to be even more like not just appealing, but sort of like something that can be taken, and it doesn't need to just be. I think Bhutan's got something very special going on, but there's a lot of these places that have been waiting for a moment to be able to say, we've been building, we've been growing things, and we hold a space for this imagination that it's a container, but we want you to come and grow with us. And I think that dynamic of with you, it is going to take on even more salience now, I think, and that's the hopeful narrative.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I think the kind of best way to handle these things is always to try and, I mean, definitely for those, and not everyone has it, unfortunately, but is to find, you know, the embodied solidarity with others that you can feel safe with, as much as you can. But yeah, but I guess what is so you were recently in Bhutan. Maybe that's something interesting to explain a bit about. What were you doing in Bhutan and what was there? And yeah, I think part of this seems to me like the slow breaking apart of the American empire, and whatever this move towards a multipolar world that seems to be happening eventually, at least, while the U.S. kind of like flails its arms up in the air. Perhaps is leading to now like just different countries, new players that have been kind of in the background for so long, that have been able to take advantage of like the cracks in the system to maybe come out with something different.
I don't want to write off America completely. I think America, with its system, has done some incredible things in the world. But there's certainly a view of America that many Americans may not have had of America that is sort of being re-cemented right now with the current political situation. And the narrative that Bhutan offers is almost 180 degrees in the opposite direction. They've explicitly sort of spoken to rejecting the concept of gross domestic product, and they've like focused in on this idea of gross national happiness. Right. They recently held their first innovation forum, which was a 1,000+ person event, largest international gathering that they've held in Bhutan. That was just last month, and I was there early in the year as well when they sort of had a trial run with a sustainable financing for tiger landscapes conference. Again, all of this is in many ways building upon this heritage that the Bhutanese have, which is a deep respect for nature, as well as a deep Buddhist culture that holds these values of loving kindness to all sentient beings, non-violence. A lot of these like sort of fundamental dynamics that are, to some extent, maybe very, very out of sync with a capitalist world.
Yeah.
And what's being proposed is some form of a bridge. They're calling it the Gellifu Mindfulness City. It's based around a town in southern Bhutan called Gellifu. But the idea is that it might provide an alternative or an adjacent additionality to the conventional development, but which somehow grounds mindfulness as part of a pathway to a different sort of approach to the commons, approach to finance. There's a lot of experts who have been looking at nature-based capital, nature-based finance, who are looking at the kinds of regulations that they might require from a jurisdiction. And this would be a new jurisdiction, a sort of like a special economic zone, special administrative region, not too dissimilar to Hong Kong, and then sort of modeling after sort of a Dubai and a Singapore, but again, with this notion that there's something unique around a tradition that doesn't focus just on production and consumption.
I feel like that sounds like almost like that sounds like the opposite of what most special economic zones are.
Well, exactly.
Which are like free trade.
100%. 100%. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that unfolds. We've been invited to offer recommendations in various different capacities. And
tell them to stay away from network states.
Network nations is the meme that we've been with Primavera. And again, I think that meme itself is maybe a bit close to network states. So, but the fundamental idea is very different in terms of like trying to build for collaborative dynamics.
Sure.
There's a lot of things happening in AI right now, obviously. What does it look like to have collaborative licensing mechanisms around the data and the training data for these large language models, how might we actually create alternatives to the sort of like hoovering that is happening with some of those dynamics? There's like collaborative mechanisms that can be baked into tokens that sort of govern the sharing of that we're working on with Primavera and others as part of this sort of collaborative AI and IP consortium that, again, would be hopefully looking to be able to bring in some respects in that Bhutanese context. So they've got their eye on a lot of different developments that are happening, and they're sort of opening space, they're creating a container for imagining. And so from our perspective, those of us who've been there, it's, again, been a very embodied experience because you go there and you feel the nature of the land, the nature around you, the people who are there and their goodwill, their intentions. Also, their wit. They're not like, just like slavish sort of like adorers and followers. They have that acerbic wit, which is just beautiful to feel as a Brit, somebody who loves a bit of banter. Like just to receive that, be on the receiving end of banter, just like makes you realize that, okay, this is a culture that has like their own traditions and their like pride, but it's an embodied sort of like wisdom that doesn't come along with just like sitting in the chair and being driven along a conveyor belt. There is some sort of like get up and go. And we met an amazing entrepreneur here who's from Bhutan but lives in Thailand, and he's been telling us a lot about his hopes for this mindfulness city and what it means for Bhutanese who've gone abroad and who might now come home but be able to sort of like bring what they've learned from abroad. And so it's a multi sort of angle approach. We've been doing our best to support. It's an incredibly inspiring vision and a space for imagination. And that's alongside other places like the Amazon. We've been welcomed by the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance, which is a group of indigenous federations and nations in Ecuador and Peru. Our hope is that what we can learn and do with Bhutan, we might be able to unfurl and support the learning of in a different context. Right. And again, it's a very embodied experience to go there and to feel the existing imagination and world that has been built and maintained for generations. Right? That is something that gives you this embodied sense of, I can remember, that my body sort of knows that this is actually the way that life can be and the world can be, and we can relate to each other as earthkin, as like family in a way that like transcends these individualistic sort of primogeniture style bloodlines of Western Europe, and like moves into this more sort of like, I am who I am because of you, the Ubuntu, the sort of like these different dynamics of self that can exist in this quasi-spiritual dimension. But I think that's, to your point, is somewhat what socialism is. It's somewhat what not being entirely individualistic in your ideologies is about. It's about actually leaning in, not just with your body, but with your soul or your spirit or your undescended self in some way to the realities, the lived experience realities of that, and what it can do for your just being, the way that you live your life. I think it's hard. It's hard when you've been so stuck in this system of status and seeing and how much capital you have and the heroes there to get yourself into this space, but by living with and alongside people who've been doing it. I mean, again, this comes back to this idea of what does it mean to embody and living alongside and embodying with and becoming with and finding opportunities and receiving the invitations and offering others the invitation to do that and have that kind of embodied imagination together.
Right.
And it doesn't need to be in Bhutan or in the Amazon. It can also be alongside our local river. Like a dear friend has just been gathering people to clean up his local river, the River Roding, and he's like made that a spiritual endeavor with the locals of his little town in England. It's beautiful to see. And then he went and took that glass of river water, and when he was called for jury duty, he was like, if it's okay with you, I'm not going to take my oath on the Bible because that's not my spirituality. My spirituality is my river. And can I take my oath on a glass of the River Roding? And they let him do it. The first time that ever happened. And these little, they're kind of quasi-spiritual, but they're rituals. They're rituals of doing and embodying that gives people, whoa, that's so cool. I want to do that, right?
So then, what are like? So yeah, I think one of the things that I did a really nice hike up to one of the temples in Chiang Mai. I'm just like really struck by, these temples being there for like thousands of years. I think also just coming from a Western context. One of the things that we were joking about is like, in at least these Buddhist temples, the image that you see of the person of the statues are often like they're relaxed. They're like cross-legged, like either focused or they're laying down completely relaxed. Which I find like really fascinating because you think about at least like Christianity, the image is Jesus on the cross dying. It's like if I was Jesus coming back, there's a friend joke that our friend Beth made, but it was like, why did they pick Jesus's worst moments to like make the infinite image that people see that then represents Christianity? That definitely has like downstream effects, and I think within the Christian thought and like shame, sacrifice, shame, and like, the death and rebirth, and like there's something with it. Whereas like Buddhists are they're like praying to a guy who's just chilling. It's very crude to say, but like.
But it's not. They're not even praying to him. They're praying to the version of themselves that he's inspiring.
Sure, yeah.
And there's
you see that in the like Thai people are just like very kind.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been incredible. Like they're such kind people. I haven't met like anyone who's been like rude
kind,
or, like,
chill. Like they're able to like just like receive like whatever it is that gets thrown at them and like give back love. I felt that on numerous occasions. I felt myself be ashamed on a previous journey to Thailand. I happened to be with some beautiful friends who were deep enough friends with me that they called me in, right? But I was an asshole this previous time, and I was just not nice. I was trying to throw my weight around, and they received it, and they were super kind and everything. And it was only thanks to my friends calling me in the next day and were like, dude, that was kind of not cool. And I was like, yeah, fuck, yeah, I'm an asshole. but there's so many beautiful examples in this culture in Thailand because of that can sometimes get missed, I think, because of there is this sort of this layer of assumptions that we bring as just visitors to a country that can often lead us to have different expectations. And I think one of the beautiful things about being able to come to a country and be invited and also be inviting of people who have been living here for quite some time to actually be imagining together, you feel less like a visitor, you feel like a co-creator. And through that lens, you get to really start to unfurl these like deeper cultural reference points around, non-violence, like being chill. You go to a temple and you see a monk who's like spending the time there just happily explaining to you like, whatever you want to chat about, like 9 till 6, they're there and they're like open monk chats. There's these incredible, as you're saying, like images of not just like sort of Buddhas like sort of lying down, but like Buddhas who have like sprouted multiple heads because they need additional faces for all the different compassion. That they're, the Buddha of compassion has all of these like sprouting heads, and it's just this idea that compassion is this beautiful thing to be treasured, and that you can constantly be creating these new versions of yourself to be able to find compassion in a new direction. And so what does it look like to have compassion for an individual like the new leader of the free world, right? Because of whatever context that they had growing up, that leads them to be this angry, violent, word-spewing individual because of a need for some kind of dominance. And it's tough sometimes, but I can see how that cultural and worldview just like sets a totally different grounding for some of these imaginings to happen. And so it is a deep pleasure to be here. It's a deep pleasure to be here after being in Bhutan, because I think being in Bhutan helped me see that side of things here with greater clarity as well. And I think we all get to see different cultures and different people with new eyes every single time if we choose to. And I think that's also the beauty of like getting off of the railroad, getting off of the
conveyor belt.
The conveyor belt. It's actually giving yourself the space to see things with new eyes.
Sure.
and feel things with a new body even.
So, like, yeah, I think the experience of being now in this just like very different cultural context, you know, and actually understanding or at least noticing the difference in how people interact and embody themselves and like embody themselves in like the micropolitics of the everyday. So like one of the things we were talking about before is like, you know, the way I framed it was like, you know, does the left need a kind of etiquette? Like how do we embody ourselves to each other in a way that we can, you know, actually acknowledge that we're all going through a tough time probably. We're all like dealing with the same shit that everybody else is dealing with. So like when you were questioning like, you know, what is the first thing, if you got to, so if we just met at a party, like what would be the first question you would ask someone? Like how would you begin to meet someone and make new connections with someone in a way that is like detached from like our tradition, like the usual questions of what do you do, you know?
Which, and again, we were just joking that question is actually seeking to position you within this sort of capitalist system. It's like how much do you earn? Is like the sort of like how much capital do you have? So the different questions might be framed around sort of understanding someone's context, right? So sort of like, where do you feel local these days? It can be, you know, we talked about this idea of attuning to a paradox, and that was just one that came up. But it's sort of like, how do you attune?
Just missed. So we just missed the last question that I asked Tony because my camera is unable to record more than 30 minutes. But yeah, so we can. What was the question I asked was, what type of question do you think, like if we were to meet in a party, what question would you ask someone to kind of break the normal capitalist etiquette into a more post-capitalist one, more frugal one?
So we talked about the default sort of capitalist questions being sort of like, what do you do? Like the underlying sort of tone being, how much do you earn? How much capital you have? Where do I rank you in this sort of like capitalist hierarchy that's like built into my brain? I hate that question. Generally, questions that put people slightly into a space of not having answered it before. Like you want to bring people into a creative space, a co-creative space ideally. So I have taken to asking questions like, how do you attune to a paradox, or what contradictions have you been dealing with in your life? And it's a pretty heavy one to sort of like kick off with, but it also, like I said, it kind of takes people out of that default thread. And I think that for me is one of those areas where joy is found. I play music mostly through improvisation. I don't really like play songs that have been written out, and it's fun, but it's not the kind of full joy space that I like to embody. And I think the same as with conversations. If a conversation is coming from a space of creativity, it's not been rehearsed, but it's actually just coming out of a space of thought and having to consider and imagine. That's the space I think we need to get into with our sort of crypto-socialist ethic, this etiquette of originality when it comes to our diplomacies. I think diplomacy is something that, you know, we're definitely taking out of the nation-state space and putting into our like empowered. We can actually build relationships that have these deeper, more fundamental, long-term impact. And yeah, having these like slightly different etiquettes to the ways that we, you know, offer each other space for co-creative imagination, and explicitly take people out of that default mode network of capitalist thinking and into this space of, we can be a bit creative here, we can be a bit fun here, we can actually open up into a bit of like potential vulnerability space, or even complexity, right? The idea that you don't need to have the solid, like acceptable answer in any context, but like things can be complicated.
Yeah. I think one of the risks and joys of like asking these types of questions, of course, there's a way that you can do it that's like kind of annoying, but then there's a way you can do it that I think that is like actually like productive, is like that if you do ask a question, then and they act weird about it, like you will then get to quickly know, are they with it a little bit as well. It's also a bit of a vibe check, of course, as well. But I think it like helps people. I think part of being a post-capitalist subject is that you then are pushed into thinking about yourself in a system in the world, and not just what do you do, is just sort of like, this is the cog, like this is the cog that I'm in, without thinking about the machine. Like, what contradictions are you dealing with, or like, you know, I know I'm within a system that has all these things going on, and I have to react to them in many ways that maybe go against what I would normally do otherwise, or whatever else, and just like acknowledges that we're all dealing with contradictions, and that's kind of okay.
It also opens up space for difficult things, and most of the time, it's hard to talk about difficult things. But if we can create containers for that, and we're actually expressing an interest and a curiosity in not just a simple answer, I'm not just going to categorize you, I'm actually here to maybe offer a bit of care, right? I think these are the sorts of like out of default, oh, this is interesting, this is not normal, like somebody's actually really interested in me as a whole person. That's kind of cool.
Yeah. So there you go. That's how you have post-capitalist etiquette. Ask weird questions at parties. You'll become really popular.
With the right kind of crew.
All right, thanks.
Thank you so much.
This is so awesome. Oh my god.